The man was just peeing by the roadside, when suddenly a rock in the distance caught his eye. He brushed away the surface dirt, and discovered it was actually a piece of gold. The man had intended to keep it all to himself. But when he saw his best friend staring at him, he reluctantly called Keith over. They immediately pulled out a lighter, and held it up to the rock. To their surprise, it glowed brighter and brighter. It seemed this really was a piece of gold. Thrilled, the two immediately grabbed their tools and began digging. To their surprise, the gold was even larger than they'd imagined. Even with two strong men lifting it together, it wouldn't budge an inch, so they continued digging deeper. Only to discover this wasn't just a single piece of gold, it was a massive gold mine. They dug until night fell, yet still hadn't reached the bottom. At the thought of never having to work again, the two shouted with excitement to start living like millionaires as soon as possible. Keith suggested that Virgil drive into town to find an excavator to help, while he stayed behind to guard the gold, since the round trip would take at least 5 days, and he had plenty of experience with wilderness survival. Virgil, however, insisted that since he was the one who discovered the gold, he had to stay behind to guard it. This selfish statement made Keith's expression darken instantly. The next day, Keith took most of the water with him, claiming he needed it to cool the engine. He left Virgil only a small amount of water and a satellite phone to stay in touch, instructing him to wait for his return. In 5 days, they would strike it rich. After Keith left, to avoid suspicion, Virgil reburied the gold. He then set up a makeshift tent beside a dead tree, to conserve his energy. After a quick meal of canned food, he went to bed early, but because of the extreme temperature fluctuations in the desert, the next day he decided to venture further out to gather more dry branches. There, he accidentally stumbled upon the wreckage of an airplane. It made for an excellent shelter, shielding him from both the scorching sun and the sandstorms. The only downside was that he couldn't see the gold he'd buried from there, so Virgil dismantled the plane into pieces, dragging the parts back to where the gold was buried, and built a makeshift tent. Through the window, he could just make out the gold not far away. Feeling at ease, he soon fell asleep. Little did he expect the desert sun to be so scorching. It burned blisters all over his forehead through the cracks in the tent. In agony, he began to think about leaving. Looking at the mountain of gold before him, he chiseled off a large chunk, enough to ensure he'd never want for food or clothing for the rest of his life. But just as he was about to leave, his satellite phone rang. It was Keith calling. He told Virgil he'd found the excavator, and was already on his way back. He told Virgil to keep a close watch on the gold, and that he'd be there soon. This put an end to Virgil's plans to leave, so he endured another 2 days in the same spot. He'd eaten all his food, and he had only 1 bottle of water left. His sunburn was getting worse and worse, but Keith showed no signs of returning. Just then, Virgil spotted a car approaching in the distance. He wanted to go ask for help, but he was afraid of losing the gold right in front of him. After a fierce internal struggle, he chose to watch the car drive away without moving, praying only that Keith would return as soon as possible. However, by the 5th day, Keith still hadn't shown up. Desperate, Virgil called to ask where he was, only to receive a dismissive reply that he'd be there soon. By then, the weakened Virgil was surrounded by starving wild dogs, his life in imminent danger. What he didn't know, however, was that on the opposite hillside, a man was silently watching him through binoculars as he was attacked by the dogs. It turned out Keith had turned back 2 days earlier. It wasn't until that moment that Virgil realized he had been deceived by his own best friend. Yet even as he lay dying, he still thought of the gold. Watching Virgil being torn apart by the wild dogs, Keith laughed smugly. Now all the gold would be his. But just as he was about to dig up the gold and strike it rich, an arrow shattered all his illusions.